Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have quite a few signing on this afternoon. We had 145 registered, which is very, very exciting. So thank you for taking time out of your day to participate in this presentation. We're going to be going over the CalVCB application, going over the different fields, the areas that are critical that be completed, and then talk a little bit too about documentation that we're looking for, depending on the different benefits that the victims and claimants are looking to seek. My name is Cindy Kaiser. I am the outreach specialist with CalVCB, otherwise known as the Victim Compensation Board, and here to provide this training for you. So please don't hesitate to ask questions along the way. We want you to use the chat box, if you would, as your phones should all be muted. If they're not, if you could please mute them. And if you do have a question, just pose it in the chat box. And then we have Melissa on the call, who is also with our CalVCB headquarters office here in Sacramento. We'll be monitoring those questions and then also raising them as they come up. Again, my name is Cindy Kaiser. I'm the outreach specialist here with the Victim Compensation Board in headquarters in Sacramento, and I've been with the program about 15 years now, and super excited to bring you this and other presentations. So thank you again for taking the time to go through the application with us. I know a lot of you are super excited about this. You're going to be helping victims and their family members with applications. And so we're excited to be able to go through all of the sections with you and help you understand the importance of certain information and the process for filing applications. So this application that we have up on the screen, there's a couple of different ways for victims and their family members to apply for the program. And that's the great thing about California. Not only do we cover the victim, but we also cover their immediate family members and some other victims that we call derivative victims. For example, somebody residing in the household of the victim at the same time could also be eligible, and that does expand even further. So if you have the opportunity to participate in one of our monthly webinars, which next month is actually the overview, we talk about all the different types of victims and derivative victims. So hopefully you'll be able to join next month or at a future month for one of those overview presentations. But that is the great thing about California. We help the victims and we help family members and some others outside of that. And so anytime you're filling out an application for a victim or their family member, they're each going to have their own application. Okay, so you never have more than one person on an application unless they're filling it out for a family member and they're the applicant. So a mom, dad, or guardian filling it out for a minor child, or an adult filling it out for an incompetent adult who they are caring for. So everybody's always going to have their own application. Our overall benefit is $70,000. Under that, we do have certain caps. So again, if you have the opportunity to take one of our overview presentations, we do identify all of the different crimes we cover, the different benefits that we have to offer, and the caps within that overall $70,000 benefit. So this application that you see here that we're going to go over is available on our website. This is what we call a fillable application. And there's a couple different ways to apply. One, this way, you can fill this out, print it, mail or fax it in. You can print out a copy to handwrite, either this one or there's another PDF version where you can print it out, handwrite all the information and mail or fax it in. The most direct and preferred method is on our website, which is just victims.ca.gov, which Melissa, if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. If a victim goes on to our website and they can go in and create an account, they'll have a portal where they can go in, complete the application, check the status at any time. They can communicate with us through the chat box and upload documents as well. So That is the preferred method. That's the quickest. And again, they have a lot of features to be able to communicate with us and, like I said, check the status. But also realizing not everybody has the means to complete an application online. And so that's why we do still have the paper application and this fillable document. As you notice up at the very top right, the associated application ID, if there is an application that has already been filed with our program, you would want to reference that here, because what we like to do is if we have applications where it's multiple family members, or maybe it's people who aren't related but they're the victim of the same crime, we want to group them together so that that process of the application is more streamlined. In other words, there might be a crime report in one but not in the other. It's just a way for us to group them and streamline that application process. So if you are aware that there's an application that's already been filed, reference that number up here to help us identify and be able to group them together. The next section you see preferred spoken and written language. If a individual has a separate preferred written and spoken language other than English, they can enter that into the box here, and correspondence will go out in that language, providing it's one of the languages that we have already translated documents into, and letters, and those you can find on our website. There's 13 languages right now other than English that we do prepare our documentation in. So be sure they identify their preferred written and spoken language. If it's a language that we don't already have documentation in, we do work with language assistant agencies to help us translate and interpret when necessary. So the next part of our application, so this is what we call section 1, and this is the claimant. This is going to be the individual who is seeking compensation. They are looking for assistance from our program. The assistance that we provide is for out-of-pocket crime-related expenses. We are the payer of last resort, so we do look to other reimbursement and recovery sources when they do come into play. But then out-of-pocket expenses is what we can assist with for the victim and their family members. So in other words, like if they have health insurance or vehicle insurance, if it's a vehicle crime, maybe renter's insurance, dental insurance, any type of insurance, life insurance, things like that, we do have to take into consideration. And I always say, but, still have them file an application, even if, they're seeking medical help with medical expenses, but they have health insurance. There's always prescriptions, co-pays, expenses that are not covered by insurance. One reason, but also because they might not have that insurance tomorrow, right? Maybe they don't have the job that they had, or maybe, they don't have the insurance 5 years from now. And this program is a lifelong benefit until they exhaust that $70,000 overall benefit. It will be here for them. So whether they use it today, tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years from now, until they exhaust those benefits, this program is here for them. So we always want to encourage them to apply. They don't ever have to use it, but it's here should they need it. So this first section, the claimant, as I mentioned, is going to be the individual that is seeking the expenses. And you're going to fill out their information with their name and as much detail as you can. Our system, when we're searching, is very finicky. So common names, it's important that we have as much information in the name that we can. And then, address, social security number, all of that, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But as much information as you can, because like if we search our system, if we search Cynthia, it's not going to pull up Cindy, but our analysts are, they're trained to know to search several different ways, but there's also other ways we can search by date of birth, by social security number. So important that this section, and I'll go over each one, important that it's completed. So when they're filling this out, we want to know what is this claimant's relationship to the crime victim. Now it could be the same. Obviously, I've put my name here. I could be the victim of a crime, and so I'm applying for myself. But let's say in this case, I'm applying for a minor child. and I'm, well, let me take that back. I'm applying for myself. Let's say my minor child is the victim of a crime and I'm applying for myself because I want counseling or some other benefits that might be available to me. So I'm going to be the claimant because I'm looking for assistance, let's say for therapy in this case. And I am the victim's parent. Now, you can see this drop down here, and I love these drop downs because it's great if you're not sure, like, how do I identify somebody? It's kind of like a cheat sheet. This is what you can identify as. These are all the different types of derivative victims, if not the victim themselves. But if I were the victim, then I would say myself, I am the victim. Or maybe I'm the victim's spouse, if my spouse or domestic partner were the victim of a crime. But in this case, I am the victim's parent. And if I have a social, then you want to make sure you put that in here because social is important if they're going to be requesting wage loss or help with support loss. Not everybody has a social security number, so that's okay if they don't. If they don't, you just want to mark that they don't have a social, or maybe they have a TIN number. You'll put that in and identify it as that. Doesn't mean we can't help somebody if they don't have a social security number. There's just some benefits that are a little more challenging to be able to assist with if we don't have a social security number. So you're just going to mark if they don't, say no social. Date of birth, very important. This is information that must be completed. You have my birthday, but I'm not going to tell you what year. So I'm going to lie and say that I am really young. Of course, maybe that's not so young to some of you, but it's way younger than I am. So date of birth is important because we need, again, we do a lot of verification depending on the benefits that are being requested. If, let's say the Social Security is not there and this box is not marked, this will stop the application in its tracks right there. It's going to delay the processing. If there's not a date of birth, it will delay the processing. So make sure that you complete this. Again, if they don't have a social, that's okay. Just mark no social. Mailing address, we need to have because we send out a lot of correspondence. And we're constantly sending out correspondence from the minute we get the application all throughout the application process. And we want to make sure that it's getting to the claimant or victim, whoever is applying. And so that information is critical. Also, contact information as far as a phone number. Phone number is important. Email is important. And because, and it's optional. Email is optional. And I see a lot of times where it's not completed. And that's fine. But I would encourage them to put an email here because a lot of times victims move around a lot, change their phone number. That way, if we can't reach them through the mail and we can't reach them through a phone number, it's possible their email is the same. And that's another avenue for us to be able to reach them. And then, of course, email type. Actually, this is my work. So the boxes you see up here from the date of the crime to now, has the claimant been in prison, on probation, on parole, or post-release community supervision because of a felony? This doesn't, we don't look into misdemeanors, but because of a felony, yes or no. If this box or the individual is required to register as a sex offender is not marked, that will stop the application. We have to have that information. And the reason being is that because they can, anybody who's on any kind of restricted status can apply with our program and they can be eligible for our program. We just can't pay their expenses, crime-related expenses, as long as they're on that status. And right now we do have a filing period. The filing period is 7 years from the date of the incident, or 7 years from the date of discovery, which what that looks like is, let's say somebody went missing 30 years ago, the remains were found recently, determined they were a victim of a homicide, it'd be 7 years from the date of that discovery. All minors have until their 28th birthday. So it's very important to get an application in. You don't want to forget, you don't want to be outside of that filing period. But even if they are, still file, because we do have good cause for late applications, which we talk about also in the overview presentation. But somebody who's on a restricted status, we want them to apply, because eventually, hopefully, that status will terminate or expire. And what we do is, if they mark yes, we send a request to the Department of Justice to find out what is that status, when does it terminate or expire, is it from a felony or a misdemeanor, which will determine whether or not we can pay their expenses. But let's say that status expires June 1st of 2025. Starting June 2nd, any expenses, crime-related expenses that victim incurs, we can start assisting with. So file the application today, even if it doesn't terminate for 5 years or 7 years, because there's a filing period right now. Get the application in, and we can start assisting with expenses when that status expires. The other reason to apply is so that their family members, the reason we want to make them eligible so that family members can be eligible, because if a direct victim is not eligible for the program, family members are not eligible for the program. And there's different reasons someone might not be eligible for the program. We look at, is it a qualifying crime? Did they cooperate during the investigation? And that's a reasonable cooperation. Were they involved in the events leading to their victimization, or some reasons an application might be denied, which again, we go over in the overview presentation. So just always get the application in, and if they want to use it, great. If they don't need to, don't have to, but it's here for them. I mean, we actually had a individual who around the age of 3 had family members that were victimized, and fast forward to today, wondered if there was an application filed on her behalf, and sure enough, there was. And so today she can start using that application, even though she hadn't used it over the last 30 years. Her benefits are still available to her, and it's whatever benefits were in place at the time that the application was filed is what she would be able to utilize. So she was very emotional over that, to know that this program was here for her and that somebody had filed an application, even though it was 30 plus years ago. So Section 1, your claimant, who's going to be seeking that compensation. In this case, we're looking at myself, mom. This section here, if you're a parent or guardian applying on behalf of a minor witness to a violent crime, you would mark this box. We don't see very many of these. This would be a minor who sees or hears a violent crime, so they were in close proximity. They're not related to the direct victim, because if they were directly related, they would be eligible as a derivative by that relationship. But this is a minor who's not related, but maybe they were next door to neighbors and there was a domestic violence incident, or maybe they were in a mall and there was an incident that took place there where they were in close proximity and witnessed it. That's what a minor witness is. Again, minor under the age of 18, and they'll apply for the program. They have benefit. I mentioned a moment ago, our overall benefit is $70,000. Minors benefit, minor witness is a $5,000 benefit, which covers therapy. Family members are not eligible. So it's a very different type of application and benefit eligibility, I should say. But and like I said, we don't see very many of these, but if we do, one of the questions I would, as a analyst, ask, if they were in close proximity, was there a threat of physical harm to them? Because our qualifying eligibility is whether they were a victim of a physical injury, a threat of physical injury, emotional injury in many of our crimes, or were deceased as a result of a crime. So if we have a minor who's in close proximity to a violent crime, it's a possibility that there was a threat of injury to them. So if we can make them a direct victim, if there was, we can establish that there was a threat of injury, physical injury to them, then we can make them a direct victim. And now instead of $5,000 in therapy, they have $70,000 in benefits, and their family members can apply. And that's true with any scenario that our analysts come across on an application. If they see that somebody's filing as a derivative victim but can be made a direct victim, they will reach out to change that status if they want that status changed. So that's your claimant, Section 1.
Hey,
It'll
Cindy,
say,
we have a question.
okay.
Someone asked if the victim is homeless and doesn't have a stable mailing address, are they able to submit an application?
Yes, they can submit an application, but we need to have some type of address. So there's I know there's different programs, Safe at Home, there's a general delivery mailbox. Excuse me, I've known some advocates to use their office mailing address for that particular victim. We do have to have some kind of address. So whatever address they want to use, whether it's a family member's, the general delivery, the office for under which they're applying, that community-based organization, if they choose to do so, just as long as we do have some kind of address. Because like I was mentioning earlier, we do send out a lot of correspondence, or sometimes I've seen, victim witness offices or community-based organizations file an application, will say care of, Sally Smith with CBO Victim Services. So however they want to identify that, but we do have to have an address. There has to be an address in there. If there's not, that will also stop the application in its processing status. So that's section 1. Here it says, if you're an adult victim and the expenses are for you, skip to section 4. So normally, because the expenses are for me, I would skip to section 4. But let's go back and say that I am the victim. I'm the victim. I need benefits. I need help with medical bills. I might want help with relocation, etc. So if not, section 2. So here again, we're going to put in the same information and gender identified. So when you're filling the application out online, is the more complete, the better. But if you're doing a paper application, honestly, like here in your handwriting, it say all of these boxes don't necessarily need to be filled out. You can say same, social, same. Our staff will know that just in the interest of time and convenience, you could technically do that. If they're filling out the application in the portal, all of the fields will need to be completed. And it does identify for you which fields are required versus which fields are optional. But again, just the more complete, the more streamlined the application process will be. So we're filing for myself, date of birth would be the same. Is the victim deceased? If so, I'm still here, but let's say fine. If the victim is deceased, you want to put a date that they were deceased, the date of death, because this helps us capture and verify expenses. We're looking for when did that crime occur, and do we have somebody who has ongoing expenses, or is this somebody who is the victim of maybe a homicide? What is that date of death? And then again, this asks the same question, whether somebody is on some kind of restricted status. So it's the same, because I'm the same individual. I'm applying for myself. But if I were applying for, let's say, a child or my spouse, section 1 is asking, am I on any kind of restricted status? Then section 2, the crime victim, are they on any kind of restricted status? So these have to be marked. Again, if they're not marked, left blank, that will hold up the processing of the application. And again, address, city, state, zip, contact number, all of the information. This is important. Again, we're always trying to reach out, because there's sometimes we're trying to update as far as the status. Sometimes we're looking for information, we're looking for documentation. Maybe we still don't have a crime report. We've requested it from law enforcement, or we've requested a restraining order from the superior court. Whatever it is that we're looking for, we're not getting, and therefore we're not able to substantiate that we have a qualifying crime. So we're going to reach out to the victim and say, look, this is the information we're looking for. You need to help us get that information. If they're not receiving the correspondence from us, then they're not going to know that that's what we're looking for. And ultimately, the eligibility would be denied for lack of preponderance of evidence of a crime. We don't want to see that happen. So contact information is huge. If they move, change their phone number, either you call or have them call our customer service line, and we'll update all of that information in the system for them. Section 3, this
Okay, so may we
is,
have another question?
sure.
If the answer is yes for the restricted status for a homicide victim, does that affect their application?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. When somebody is deceased and on a restricted status, that dies with them, goes away. Great question. So section 3 is the parent or guardian. So remember in section 1, initially I was filing because my child's the victim of a crime. If I'm filing for a minor, let's say I'm filing for my child, they're a victim of a crime, they need assistance with either medical bills or therapy, I'm the parent or guardian who's going to sign the application on their behalf. Or if I'm applying for an incompetent adult, I'm the applicant. So that claimant and crime victim will be shown in section 1 and 2, and then my information in section 3 as the parent or guardian. Here again, your drop-down menus that identify, are you the parent, adoptive parent, grandparent, grandchild, which are you, what is your relationship to the victim? So let's say claimant's parent, again, preferred written and spoken language, contact information, name, full name, date of birth, gender, social. This is important because sometimes, especially if you're filing for, let's say, a minor, the insurance that we're going to be utilizing is under that parent's insurance. That's why we need your social as well, because we're doing verification with different medical health providers, dental providers. So that information helps streamline that process. Again, mailing address, restricted status information, important that all gets filled out, whether there's a social or not. So that's the applicant. The next section, this is section 4. This is information about the expenses that either the crime victim or derivative victim might have. The top half is specifically related to the victim of the crime. And these are the following benefits that are available to that crime victim. So they're going to mark what they want assistance with. Medical bills, maybe they want residential security, mental health treatment, and maybe assistance with their wage loss. Let's say somebody's the victim of a drunk driver or some type of vehicle crime. We do cover vehicle crimes, or they're just a victim of an assault and battery, and their injuries are such that they can't work because of their injuries for a period or extended period of time. So now they've lost their wages and they need help with wage loss. We do cover help with wage loss. Now, our overall benefit is $70,000. It's very rare that we see that get exhausted, but it certainly can happen if you think about somebody who needs assistance with their wages and somebody who has very high medical bills. So we want to know, what is it that you want assistance with? Do you want us to help with your wage loss, your medical bills, or both, but one can exhaust the other? So I would say if somebody needs help with their wage loss, that they're probably going to want that over their medical bills, and then we won't pay their medical bills. So if medical bills come in to be paid, we know that we're going to be focusing on their wage loss. This is important because a lot of times, when they're filling out this application, they're not aware of this. And this is why we bring this to you. We're making you aware, because if they mark medical and they want mental health, home security, but they need help with their wages, and we start getting medical bills in, if those medical bills get paid, and let's say they have 50,000 in medical bills, we pay that, there's only 20,000 left to help with wage loss. So we want to identify, and our analysts are good with doing that, but it certainly helps for you to know and for the victim to know that we need direction in that. Where do they want these benefits applied? And most likely, like I said, let's focus on the wage loss, because with wage loss, they could chip away at those medical bills, put food on the table, pay mortgage, pay rent, help with other family household necessities with wage loss. Because Otherwise, that could get exhausted very quickly. So just let us know and, have that conversation with them. Other crime-related expenses, typically we do not cover personal property unless it's something that's medically necessary, like a wheelchair or prescription glasses that were either lost during the crime or necessary as a result of the crime, we can assist with. But like I said, standardly, we don't cover personal property, but I always encourage everybody to submit all of their receipts and let us take a look and see. There are some extenuating circumstances under relocation, for example, where we might be able to, and that is also covered in our relocation presentation that we do provide a couple of times a year. So stay tuned for that. All of these webinars you can find on our website. We post them a couple of months out along with their topics. But a cell phone, like I said, typically we don't cover, but if it's something that the perpetrator damaged or stole, it's possible we can. We have to look at the scenario because that's a lifeline for somebody, right? We don't want somebody to be without that cell phone, without that lifeline. So I always encourage just submit all of the receipts, let us take a look at them, let the analysts review and determine what they can and can't cover. This bottom section is going to be for the derivative victim. So someone
Hey,
other
Cindy,
than the victim of the crime.
we have a few questions.
Okay, shoot.
Okay, one is, what is the compensation eligibility for an adult? Is it 7K or 70K?
70,000, 70.
And then the next one is for sexual assault survivors, if the survivor completes a non-investigative report kit and chooses not to proceed with the prosecution at the time, are they eligible for an CalVCB application?
So, good question. And again, that's all covered in our overview, but I will say that, while we look at cooperation with law enforcement, identifying a suspect, apprehension, conviction is important. It's not a requirement. There are reasons that somebody might not want to identify a suspect, or maybe they don't even know who the suspect is, but maybe don't want to identify them. There could be various reasons, and we just want to know, what is the reason and is it reasonable? Maybe it's their employer, maybe it's somebody that they work with, go to school with, or whatever the case may be. So that's not a requirement. I also want to point out that it's not a requirement that a crime be reported to law enforcement. Law enforcement, if it is, of course, we want a copy of the report. And when we're trying to verify certain elements of the crime, we do give significant weight to law enforcement. A lot of times we will call them to find out if somebody wasn't cooperative, what level did that rise to? Did it interfere with the investigation? Those are things that we need to verify. But having said that, there's always ways for us to mitigate lack of cooperation or involvement. So every case is going to be on a case-by-case basis. But I will just say it's not a requirement, but we want to find out if they didn't cooperate, why not? And what level did that rise to? Hopefully that answers that question.
And then we still have a few more. So would you recommend only putting wage loss and not choosing the other losses?
I would say yes to that, just because so that we ensure that those other expenses are not paid prior to addressing the wage loss. I mean, they can always add it later if they want to wait and see, what does my wage loss look like? And are there funds left over to pay? Because remember, this is a lifelong benefit until they exhaust it. So we could focus on wage loss and later decide, okay, now I have some medical bills, or I decide I want some treatment. So that would probably be a safe way to go. But like I said, our analysts are trained to, and know to reach out and find out. But sometimes even the victim might not know that, my medical bills are huge. So I would say have that conversation with them again. let us know. We can make a note in the system. We can put an alert that we're going to need help with medical expenses, but we want to focus on our wage loss. Or the alternative is just don't mark that at all, and we can apply that later. I do get asked that question a lot, like, oh, they didn't mark that they want relocation expenses. Do they need to fill out a new application? And no, just call up, let us know. Now they need to relocate because maybe now the perpetrator is getting out of prison, or maybe they're bothering them again and they need to relocate. So that can always be done at a later date. Just because they don't mark it here doesn't mean we can't help them with it down the road.
Okay. And then is there a way to pay for therapy services directly to the provider in real time?
Say that again, Melissa, sorry.
Is there a way to pay for therapy services directly to the provider in real time?
Okay, our program often is referred to as a reimbursement program, but really most of our benefits can be paid directly to a provider, so that victim is not out of pocket. Therapy is definitely one of them. Medical expenses, relocation can be paid directly to a landlord. Funeral and burial can be paid directly to a provider, or any provider who is willing to provide the service and bill the program. As long as they provide that bill and a W-9, we can pay directly so that the victim is not out of pocket. And medical expenses, medical, dental, and therapy are paid at a reduced rate. And so it really is best to have the provider bill our program directly, because once they are paid at that reduced rate, they are accepting that as payment in full. So they can't bill the claimant or the victim for the difference. If the victim pays for that out of pocket and submits the receipts to us, they're going to get reimbursed at that reduced rate. So there is a reduced rate. Again, best to have the provider work with us directly, bill us directly, so that when they are paid, it's considered payment in full. But sometimes, victims, they want to work with a provider who doesn't want to work with our program and they're willing to pay that rate. That's fine. They'll just submit the receipts to us. We'll reimburse them, but again, it'll be at whatever the reduced rate is.
Okay. And then since the compensation eligibility is 70K, is there a max amount on certain benefits? For example, like relocation expenses, does that max out at a certain amount, or also at 70K, so they can let the victims know a more realistic amounts to the benefit they can receive?
Yes. So the overall cap is 70,000, and that is correct. There are caps under that umbrella for different benefits. So, for example, medical and dental benefits are up to the full 70,000. Moving and relocation is a little over 3,400. Mental health treatment caps out at 10,000. Residential security caps out at 1,000. So yes, they do have individual caps underneath that umbrella. Income loss, wage loss, support loss does go up to the full 70,000. If you go onto our website, there's what we call a benefit reference guide. If you go up into the search engine up to the top right, put in benefit reference guide. That's a great resource for you. It identifies all of our benefits. Who's eligible, whether it's the direct victim or the derivative victim, what the requirements are for that benefit, and then what the cap is on that benefit. So again, that's called a benefit reference guide. Maybe Melissa, you could put that into the chat, benefit reference guide.
Right now.
And so that's a great resource for you. And that's also covered in our overview, which next month, September, the third Tuesday of the month, will be our overview topic. But we also do presentations for various agencies when you're in need. So also on our website, if you go to the what's called the advocate tab, we're actually changing it, so it might be done today or tomorrow, called our partners, where you can go download the form, request a CalVCB presentation, and submit that to us, and we can provide a presentation to you, either an overview or how to complete an application. We have various topics that we can present to you. So,
We have an additional question. So someone mentioned that they're new to all this, and one of their clients is a nonprofit, and they requested a court-ordered list, listing his name and a specific dollar amount. He has been trying to reach out to the DA's office with no answers. Does he need to go in person, or is there any other institution that can provide this information?
I can't speak to that. I'm not sure. I would, if they're not reaching the DA's office directly, maybe try the victim witness office there, which is usually a separate line of communication, and they might be able to help them with that need. But I'm not sure if they're asking about crime documentation that would be necessary for purposes of our program.
And then would substance abuse would a substance abuse program fee be covered if the victim suffered from mental health illnesses related to the injury?
Would definitely be considered. Those are going to be on a case-by-case basis. If we determine that somebody's drug abuse or alcohol abuse or whatever the scenario is, can be verified that it's directly related to the crime, we can consider assisting them with such treatment. But those are going to be case by case, and we need to have documentation to support it. Any other questions?
That should be it for now.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So this bottom section is for someone other than the victim. So this would be the derivative victim, a family member, a roommate, which we also do cover because, I mentioned that's a great thing about California. We also cover family members, but we also cover individuals that are residing in the same household with somebody who is a victim of a crime, because crime affects not only the individual, but the whole family, whether it's someone directly related to you or somebody that you're residing with. And this is where they would identify what type of expenses they're looking for assistance with, whether it's therapy, funeral and burial, medical expenses for a deceased victim, wage loss of support. And all of these we do go over in the overview presentation. So if you've not had the opportunity, or even if you have and you want a refresher, please join in one of those presentations, because it really does cover quite a bit more depth into the program. This bottom of section 4, if they are requesting an emergency award, these are generally paid, as you can see here, within 30 calendar days of receipt of the application. It has to be a qualified emergency award. So when somebody is requesting an emergency award, and it's section 4 on this application, if they go into the online application, it's I'm not sure exactly what section right offhand, but it's on there as well. They need to provide the supporting documentation with the application. Like it's not documentation that can follow, because we're looking at the application today, getting it processed. They're asking for an emergency award. What is that emergency award for? We need to know. So let's say it's for funeral and burial. We need to have the funeral and burial contract or receipts showing those expenses that were paid. If it's for relocation, we need to have a complete relocation packet. If it's for, let's say, a medical bill that they paid, a $5,000 bill, and now they're in dire need of those funds, it's a financial hardship, we need to have verification of those funds that were paid out and that they were directly related to the crime. So if it's requested to be filed as an emergency award and that documentation does not accompany the application, like I said, it can't follow at a later date. It needs to be with the application. So don't submit the application until you have it. But if it does come in without that support, the emergency award will be denied. Doesn't mean the application is denied. It just means it's going to go this route instead of that route. So just keep that in mind, that when they're applying for an emergency award, we have to have the documentation at the time the application is filed to support it. Section 5, this is the crime information. Now, you can see up here, it starts with law enforcement agency, but this could actually be any agency. It doesn't have to be law enforcement. I mentioned earlier that it's not a requirement that a crime be reported to law enforcement. We have other ways to substantiate that a crime occurred, and our overview identifies all of those. But for example, domestic violence could be a letter from a domestic violence shelter. Human trafficking could be documentation from a human trafficking caseworker attesting to the fact that that victim is a victim of human trafficking. It could be a restraining order from Superior Court. So there's lots of different types of documentation we can accept to verify that a crime occurred. If it's been filed with law enforcement, we'd like to see a copy of the report, but this is where you would identify. So let's say it's Sacramento Sheriff. The most complete information that we have here is important because, for example, Sacramento County within, we have Sacramento Sheriff, we have Sacramento PD, we have Citrus Heights, I think it's PD, Rancho Cordova PD, I think we have Elk Grove PD, we have CHP. So we really need to know who was the responding agency so that if the report is not available to be uploaded, and we're going to be requesting it, we need to know where to request it from. Especially Los Angeles, I think there's 100 different jurisdictions. So the more information we have, the more streamlined this is going to be if we're going to be the ones requesting it. So Sacramento Sheriff, or if it's Sacramento PD, we need to know. And then the date of the crime. So when did the crime occur? It could have been 6/1/2022, and it was just a 1-day incident. 6/1/2022 is what you're going to put in. But let's say we have domestic violence that occurs over a period of years, or let's say we have a child who's a victim of child abuse or molest that happened. They're 10 right now, and it happened when they are around 5, but they're not really sure because they don't have that comprehension of time. But they say, well, I think it was right around when kindergarten started, so we can say, just to cover the bases, 2020, let's say, and to the present day, and we'll say whatever today's date, or they'll say, it ended around second grade, so school gets out roughly June, we'll say June 1, 2022, kindergarten to second grade. And this doesn't have to be exact. We're just trying to look for that period of time that crime would have occurred. And this has a lot to do with our verification process and also with capturing those expenses within that period, because we can go back and assist with expenses that were incurred. It doesn't have to be expenses from the date the application is filed forward. Somebody might have relocated a year ago due to a crime. And if we have all of the proper documentation, the relocation packet, and all the information that needs to go with that, and they have receipts to show what those moving expenses were, we can assist with that. Same thing with, therapy sessions. Maybe this child was in therapy during this time. So we're just trying to capture what that period of time that the crime occurred, over a period of time, or was it a single day event? The best that you can capture here. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. When was the crime reported? As best that can be identified. We mentioned the crime could have been 6/21, 24. Are we even at that date yet? We are. We're in August. So 6/21/24, and most likely the crime could have been reported that day. I shouldn't say most likely. Was it reported that day, or it could have been reported, 2 months later, 3 months later? We're just trying to capture that information. So when we're doing our verification, this information is what we can relay to law enforcement, because law enforcement is going to want to know, or whatever responding agency, the crime occurred in June, but they didn't report it until September. So most likely their crime report is going to be dated in September. And then whatever that number is. Again, this is important because when we're requesting this documentation from law enforcement, they need to know Who is the victim? When did the crime occur? When was it reported? A report number if you have it. If we're lacking some of that information, it could take a while to get that report from law enforcement. By law, they have a certain amount of days to provide it to us. But if they don't have the information to be able to pull up that documentation, it's gonna, it could delay that process. Describing the injuries. What were the injuries of victim? Was it just emotional trauma? Did the victim suffer a broken right leg? Bruise to left arm? Whatever the injuries are, again, we're looking at providing assistance for crime-related expenses. And what are those expenses? Is it, emotional trauma? They're looking for therapy. Do they have medical bills for a broken right leg, a bruise to their left arm? We want to identify, so when these bills come in, it's part of our verification process. So it helps, again, streamline that process. The location of the crime. If we know the location of the crime, again, when we're requesting from law enforcement or whatever agency, that's important. Where did the crime occur? And this is important also because if it occurred out of state, if they are a resident of California at the time, they can be eligible for our program, even if they were victimized in another state or territory. So the address is important, but maybe they don't know the address, and we can say the corner of 5th and Main. Or maybe they just say, oh gosh, let's see. Oh, think of a restaurant to me. My favorite, Miyagi's. In Miyagi's Lion Village. That's acceptable too. We're just trying to identify where did this crime occur? Because sometimes there isn't an address. Sometimes a crime occurs on a street corner. So it could be at the corner of 5th and Main. Maybe it occurred in an establishment, and you can say, some Lutheran church. So just trying to capture where did that crime occur, and maybe, like I said, it occurred out of state. So as much detailed information as you can provide to us so that we can identify whether we can cover. If and this is in the overview too, if we have a California resident, they're victimized outside of the state or in another territory, as long as they are a resident of California at the time, could be eligible for California. Anybody who's victimized in California, doesn't matter where they reside, could also be eligible for the program. So that's what we look at when we're talking about residency, and again, all covered in the overview presentation. Here, is the suspect known? Sometimes they don't know the suspect. Sexual assault victims don't know. Hit and run obviously don't know the suspect. If they know who committed the crime, we would like to have that information. So because at the beginning, I mentioned about, first of all, cooperation. A large part of our funding is through restitution, and restitution is what the judge imposes on offenders. And so apprehension, conviction, identifying apprehension, conviction is important because a large part of our funding is through restitution. But having said that, again, it's not a requirement. They might not know who the suspect is, or they're too afraid to identify them. Maybe they fear retaliation. Like I mentioned earlier, maybe it's their employer, maybe it's a family member. So there's reasons somebody might not want to identify a suspect. That's not a requirement, but we're going to want to know why, and did it rise to a level that it interfered with the investigation where law enforcement or whatever responding agency could not do their job. But having said that, again, doesn't mean we're going to deny. We have to have that information. And then so the location of the crime is important. Over here, we see the type of crime. What was the type of crime? So this is again where this, if you're not sure, this gives you some choices. Child abuse, domestic violence, also lets you know, this kind of is a cheat sheet as to the different types of crimes that CalVCB can cover. Again, looking for that physical injury, threat of physical injury, emotional injury, or if someone is a victim of a homicide. And these are all the crimes. Or if you don't know, you're just going to say, I don't know what type of crime, and we can figure it out through the crime documentation that is submitted. So that's your crime information there. Any questions on any of the, oh, I wanted to mention out, so sorry. So up here, I mentioned before, it's not necessarily law enforcement. It might be, maybe you're using a restraining order to substantiate that a crime occurred. We have a restraining order that's been put into place. We have the request for restraining order, which is going to be required. If you're using a restraining order, we have to have the request for restraining order, because that's the document that the person seeking protection fills out saying why they need to be protected. And then again, we're going to be looking for, was there a physical injury, threat of physical injury, emotional injury? What was the injury, and what was the incident that took place that they're seeking this need for protection? So it could be Sacramento Superior Court. It could be Department of Health and Human Services. It could be medical records. It could be therapy records. So whatever the agency is can be identified here. And I think we are in the process of updating this application, which would expand this information. So what you want to put in here is whatever agency responded. Again, doesn't have to be law enforcement, whatever, maybe it's ABC, human trafficking agency, whoever, whatever agency you're going to be using the documentation to substantiate that the crime occurred is what you want to put in that section. And then as much information as you can fill out below that. Any questions on that?
Yeah, we have a few questions. For human trafficking, can a document showing the victim is enrolled in an HT program be sufficient, or do they need to be does there need to be a specific affidavit statement?
Affidavit.
Yes, stating the victim is legally defined as an HT victim.
Yeah, so being enrolled in a program is not going to be sufficient. Think of it, if you're familiar with a crime report, what does a crime report look like? We need to know what happened, where did it happen, when did it happen, and what happened, suspect if identified. So we need to have all the elements of the incident that took place. And that's why, so an affidavit from a human trafficking agency on their letterhead attesting to the fact that that victim is a victim of trafficking is what's going to be required there, or a law enforcement report. So just being enrolled in a program by itself most likely would not be sufficient, but I would, want to look at the documentation. Sometimes one piece of documentation by itself isn't sufficient, but if we have maybe that and some medical records, or that along with some therapy records, the totality of the documentation could be sufficient. So I would provide whatever you have, but just keeping in mind that by itself probably would not be sufficient. But we'd have to review it and see what information it entails.
And then if a victim is living with the perpetrator, can they still request benefits?
Oh, absolutely. Our program is very confidential. No information is extended to anybody unless, they go through a court of law. Sometimes that gets a little tricky if they're at the same address, because we are sending out a lot of correspondence, so they might want to use a different address, but they can definitely seek benefits. So a couple things about that. One, sometimes the perpetrator is the provider of the insurance, so they are not required to utilize that insurance. Remember, we're the payer of last resort, and we do look to insurance, but we do not require a victim to utilize their spouses or domestic partners insurance. And this is obviously for confidentiality reasons, so they can reach outside of those providers. Secondly, they're residing with them, so they still are in need of assistance. An area that they might not be able to apply for is relocation. I mean, we're going to look at relocation. The documents state that you're not going to notify the perpetrator of where you're moving to, or you agree to get a restraining order. So the documentation and the relocation packet, and if you, that's all on our website. If you want to download that packet to become familiar with it, I would highly recommend that, just to see what's in the packet, so that if you're going to be assisting a victim with relocation, it's good to familiarize yourself with those documents. But one of them does state that you're signing that you're not going to notify them of where you're moving to, or if you have to, maybe you have children that you share, that you will agree to get a restraining order. That would be a scenario where assistance could be delayed or not paid if the victim doesn't adhere to those requirements.
Okay. And then will the suspect be contacted or notified of the application for the agency listed? There needs to be some documentation from the agency supporting that the crime occurred.
We never reach out to the suspect ever. At least, through our program, we would never have any reason to reach out to the suspect for any type of information whatsoever. That should never happen.
And then that's all for now.
Thank you. And when, victims or family members or providers calling into our program, they are vetted to ensure that we're speaking with who we should be speaking with, so that we don't provide information to somebody that shouldn't have privy to that information. So our staff does ask, verify date of birth or social security number, things like that. The next section is what we call our representative information. The only time this will be filled out is if an advocate or a family member or a friend is going to be representing the victim. Anybody can represent a victim except for medical or mental health providers who are providing a treatment to that victim. But anybody else can be a representative, whether it's an advocate in a community-based organization, the victim witness, district attorney's office, or like I said, a family member. So the first section here is you're going to identify yourself. Are you an attorney, a victim advocate, community-based? You could be the spouse, parent, family member, or even a friend. Anybody can represent a victim, like I said, except for those that are providing a treatment. If it's other, indicate, maybe they want to say, I'm her aunt, which I don't think was one of the choices, however they want to identify. And then the name of that representative. Again, as much detailed information as possible. Might be from the Sacramento County DA's office, and then address, phone number. Where did I go? Oh, so down here, requesting payment. This is for attorneys only. Attorneys who are representing victims with our program. This isn't for a victim or family member that files a civil suit. This is specifically an attorney who's just assisting with the application and the processing of it. Their benefits are a certain percentage of the bills that are paid on a victim's application, and I believe it's the same, still not to exceed $500. So attorneys who are assisting with those applications would be filling out this section here. Anybody who's going to be representing, whether it's an advocate or a family member, must sign and date the representative section. What this does, so basically the role of a representative is to help us gather information for that victim, provide documentation that might be required depending on what benefit they're looking for, help us keep in contact with that victim. Before I mentioned, it's really important that we have up-to-date contact information because we're constantly sending out correspondence and we want to make sure that they're getting it. So it's just helping us process and streamline this application for that victim. Maybe they speak a different language. Maybe they just don't understand, or maybe they're, working with a minor. A social worker could be a representative if they're working with a minor. Actually, the social worker wouldn't be a representative. They would be the applicant on the application and sign the application. But that's the role of the representative. As much information that can be filled out here that they can, and then make sure that it is signed and dated. Anybody can assist a victim with an application. whether you're an advocate in a community-based organization or the DA's office, Victim Witness Center, can assist a victim with an application, but is not required to actually represent them. So that's up to that individual or that office as to whether they're going to choose to represent the victims or not. And like I said, I mentioned the role of the victim, but also what the representation allows is for that representative to call into our office to get status updates, find out, what's going on with the application. Is there information that's needed? How can they assist in the processing of this application? Any questions on?
Yes, we had two. So it's is this section only for applicants who would want someone else to be representing them?
Yes, that
And
section is only going to be for someone who's going to actually represent a victim.
okay, and then are the representatives allowed to get status updates about the application from CalVCB?
Yes, and I imagine that question was posed before I answered that. Yeah, that's a great question. That's what part of their the benefit of representing an individual, again, whether you're an advocate, a family member, a friend, so that you can help them with the processing and streamlining of the application. You can call in once you're identified as a representative and it's been signed and dated, acknowledging that. You can call in anytime and ask, what's the status? Where are we with this? Is there anything that you need? Anything that I can assist with? And also if an application eligibility or a bill's been denied and they want to file an appeal, you can assist them with that appeal process. So there's a lot of rules for the representative.
And then if clients add a representative to their application, will the applicant still receive notifications?
Yes. The only time the victim wouldn't receive correspondence if they are being represented by an attorney, that correspondence will go directly to the attorney. If they're being represented by an advocate or a family member or a friend, all correspondence still goes directly to the victim.
That's all for now.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So next section is section 7, gosh. How did you find out about the board? And section 8, federal reporting information. How did you find out about the board? These next two sections, 7 and 8, are voluntary, but highly encourage if they fill this out. Is very helpful to us when we're putting together numbers. If we're running stats on, quarterly or fiscal basis, and we're looking to see, and, how often did adult protective services refer to our program? Maybe less than 1%, we might think, okay, we need to reach out to adult protective services. Are we getting referrals from law enforcement, child protective services? What does the media look like? So where are they finding out about our program? We want to be able to fill in those gaps. If we're finding out that, billboards or posters are bringing in a lot of referrals, then great, we need to continue with that method of outreach, right? So how can we broaden our outreach, or where are those gaps that might need to be filled in? So I would just encourage them to fill this out. Same with reporting information. We want to know, where are the gaps in our outreach, or where are we, not fulfilling that obligation to reach the underserved. So important for us when we're running our numbers, so that we can ensure, okay, this is where we need to focus our efforts. The Asian community, we see that the crime is high in a certain Asian, the population in a certain area, but yet we're not getting referrals. We need to make sure that we expand our outreach. So again, voluntary, but we, highly suggest that if they choose to please fill it out. It helps us at the end of the day, help the victims, right? Next section asks if the victim is disabled. Victim not disabled, let's say the victim is disabled. Was the victim disabled prior to the crime? No. So the victim is disabled as a result of the crime. This is important because one, when we look at our wage loss, we're looking at, what were the injuries associated. Our wage loss goes up to 70,000. It pays out 5 years from the date of the incident. Unless that victim is permanently disabled, it could be paid out longer or until it's exhausted. So maybe they're not disabled. Maybe they were disabled prior to the crime and the crime injuries further exacerbated that disability. So these are the things that we're looking at. Again, every time we're looking at expenses and determining were these injuries crime related, sometimes it's possible that a medical bill is a certain percentage related to the crime, or same thing with therapy. Somebody goes into therapy and they're in there discussing the crime under which they were a victim, but they're also discussing a recent divorce. It actually asks on the therapist's treatment plan, what percentage of the treatment is directly related to the crime. Maybe they say 80% to the crime, 20% with regard to a divorce they're going through, or maybe it's 100% related to the crime. We have to establish the percentage of therapy or medical bills that are related to the crime. Insurance information, this section is extremely important, critical that it be filled out the best to your knowledge or the victim's knowledge. If they have no insurance of any kind, you're going to mark no insurance of any kind. That means they don't have medical insurance, they don't have dental coverage. Let's say they're a victim of a vehicle crime, there's injuries, they have no vehicle insurance, no insurance whatsoever. They'll mark no insurance of any kind. But maybe it's not even a vehicle crime. They're a victim of domestic violence. They don't have any insurance, nothing to cover therapy and such. But if they do have insurance, because we are the payer of last resort, we have to look to those other insurance reimbursement and recovery sources. That is probably an area that can delay the processing of paying or assisting with expenses. If they have insurance, the insurance has to be billed. There's just no way around it. I know sometimes that's challenging, but it has to be done. We have to have that explanation of benefits from that insurance. What are they covering? Are they covering a portion? Are they covering a portion of it? Are they not covering anything at all? So that we know what are the actual out-of-pocket expenses that we can assist with. So this section may not be enough for you to fill in all of that information, and you can certainly attach the declaration page to a homeowner's policy if the crime took place at the residence, or the declaration or cover page to a vehicle insurance policy if it's a vehicle related crime, or send in. I've seen where they'll take a picture of their insurance card front and back and send that in. So as much information as you can provide to help us streamline, especially, so like what we're doing is at the beginning of the application, and when I mentioned, we're constantly sending out correspondence. When they fill out that application, and if they say, I need help with my wages and I need help with my medical bills and I might need to relocate, we're going to be looking for, okay, do you have any insurance? And you want help with your wages, who's your employer? And you want to relocate, is that relocation packet completed? And we're going to be sending out information, and we'll send out the relocation packet, start filling this out. So the idea is that once we determine that they're eligible, hopefully we have all of that verification in where now we can start assisting with those expenses. If we don't have that verification, or we haven't been provided the information to request it, it's going to delay the processing of helping them with their expenses. So the more information up front, the more streamlined the process will be. We really want to try to help with those expenses sooner than later, right? So any insurance you can fill in here, health insurance, policy numbers, whatever you can provide. Did they file a claim with their insurance? We need to know that. Who's the name of the insured? Maybe this is for a child, or maybe it's a spouse or domestic partner. and we're filing, I put my name up there, Cindy Kaiser, but maybe the insurance is under Scott Peters. Now you have more information about me than you might want to know. That's important. And I say that because I've seen that a lot where we get insurance verification returned because they say we don't have anybody insured by that name because maybe they put in my name, Cindy Kaiser. I'm not the I'm covered, but I'm not the insured. The insured is my husband. And so if I'm under his policy, that's what they need to know. Those are little things that can delay the processing of trying to get, verification for insurance and such. Vehicle insurance, auto insurance. If it's a vehicle crime, we have to have this information. This gets really challenging because if we have a vehicle crime and we have, let's say, a suspect vehicle and the victim's vehicle, we need the victim's insurance. We need the suspect's insurance. Now, the victim's not always going to know that. They're not going to be able to get that, but we do have to make reasonable attempts to get it. Sometimes it's in the crime report where law enforcement, especially if it's done by CHP, they have the parties listed who were involved in the vehicle accident, as well as their insurance if they're able to take it at the time, or maybe they don't have insurance. We need to verify that. That's probably equally challenging as getting like information with health insurance. These are verification processes that take time to come back to us. So the sooner we can get that verification out, like right at the onset of the application, if we have all of this information, we start sending out all that verification now. So again, hopefully we have it back by the time we've been able to determine their eligibility, and now we can start helping with those expenses. Any other insurance that they might have, Medi-Cal, Medicare, workers' comp, if the injury or the crime took place at their place of employment, workers' comp could be considered, will be considered, but not all carry workers' compensation, or any other type of insurance. When we do the overview presentation, we mention what some of those reimbursement and recovery sources are. Could be life insurance. We said workers' compensation, could be a civil suit. So as much information as you can provide. And if you need to attach declaration pages or any other pages to assist with that information, just attach it to your application when it's submitted into the system, or if it's mailed or faxed in. Any questions? Employer information. If they're going to be requesting wage loss or support loss, if an individual is injured and unable to work as a result of their injuries, they might want wage loss. We have to have their employer's name, or maybe they're self-employed. That's fine. We just have to be able to verify income. We're going to be reaching out to the employer. We're going to be reaching out to the Franchise Tax Board to get 2 years of tax returns. We have to get a disability statement, and they will be required to file for disability if it's after so many days that they're requesting assistance. Here you do say that, though, is it okay to contact the employer? If they say no, we will not contact them. Maybe the employer is the perpetrator. There might be a reason they don't want us to contact them. So there are ways around this. We will need to get information eventually. So maybe we provide them with that verification form and they take it directly to their employer, because maybe the perpetrator works in the HR department. There could be reasons they don't want us to contact their employer. So we have to have this information. If they're not seeking wage loss or support loss, this section does not need to be completed. Are they self-employed? Yes or no? We just need all of that information. Did they miss work as a result of the injuries? Did the crime occur while they were on the job? If they missed work as a result of the injuries, we want to look at, what was that time lost? What were their wages? Did they have bonuses? Did they work overtime routinely? If the crime occurred at the job or workplace, then as I mentioned up above with insurance, we're going to be looking for workers' compensation information. And then whatever workers' compensation pays, then we can assist anything after that, that again is out of pocket for that victim. Civil suit. This is if, again, they're going to be filing civil suit. Simple yes or no. Are they filing a civil suit? If yes, we need the name of the attorney. We know that civil suits can take years to settle. Sometimes they don't settle at all, or they settle and there's no compensation for the party that's filed the suit. But we have to have this information because we are the payer of last resort. If there is a civil suit and it settles, those funds will be redirected back to the program, those funds for which we paid. So let's say we paid 20,000 in medical bills. 2 years later, the suit settles, victims paid $100,000, 20,000 will be paid back to the program. The suits do take a while to settle. Like I said, sometimes they don't settle at all. So we help the victim today with their expenses, whether it's medical, therapy, but we have to have that attorney contact information so that we can keep in contact. So if and when that suit settles, the program will be reimbursed. If you know that, if they don't know that they're going to be filing a suit, they say no in the meantime, but then decide that they are going to, please let us know. We don't want to run into a scenario where we find out 5 years later that they did file a civil suit and they were paid out an award. Funds were not paid back to the program. They will go after those funds. So we don't want to see that happen. So just try to provide that information and we can keep in close contact with them.
Oh,
Um,
hey, Cindy, we have a question.
okay.
Do human traffic victims do this section as they were unable to work as a victim of human trafficking?
So human trafficking victims, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. We do provide wage loss for human trafficking victims. This is a little bit newer, I think 2 years ago, maybe longer, probably longer, time flies. But we do provide wage loss for human trafficking victims. They do not need to complete this section 10. It's a completely different process. There's a human trafficking wage compensation form that's on our website that will need to be filled out. And we also obviously need to verify that they are a victim of human trafficking. So once that eligibility has been determined and they are a victim of trafficking, we're going to look at that time of deprivation. What was that period of their loss of liberty? The wage loss is 10,000 per year for a maximum of 2 years, so potentially 20,000, but it depends on that period of deprivation. And that's what CalVCB will pay out. So there is a verification process involved, but it's not the same as, we don't have to look at tax records. We don't have to get a disability statement. We're just looking at that they're eligible under the human trafficking crime and what was that period that they were deprived of their liberty. Again, it's a $10,000 maximum benefit per year, maximum of 2 years.
Thank you, Cindy. That's all.
Thank you. And good question. Thank you for bringing that up while we were on that section. I appreciate that. So our last couple of sections, very important. This will hold up the application if this information release is not signed. This is stating that the applicant is giving their permission to a healthcare provider, medical provider, funeral provider, franchise tax board, wherever it is that we're reaching out to get information, because we're verifying that a crime occurred, we're verifying that they have crime-related injuries, and there's certain agencies and providers that we need to reach out to do so. So this is that release of information. This has to be signed and dated, no matter who is the applicant on the application, whether it's the crime victim themselves, whether it's a parent, legal guardian, social worker, it has to be signed and dated. This next section is my agreement to the California Victim Compensation Board. So if I or anyone on my behalf who's signing this application receives any payments from the offender, civil lawsuit we just talked about, insurance policy, that they understand that they may be responsible for repaying the program. And so that's why it's important that we have this information up front. We don't want to see somebody realizing down the road that they received a settlement or received funds on their behalf that would have been otherwise either paid to the program or are funds, benefits offset by those reimbursement or recovery sources. So this section always has to be signed as well. Well, let me rephrase that. This section has to be signed if it's anybody that's an applicant other than a social worker. So whether it's a parent, legal guardian, the victim themselves, this section has to be signed and their name printed. If it's a social worker, as the applicant for a minor victim or an incompetent adult, social worker has to fill out information release. Just keep in mind, this section always has to be signed. The promise to pay has to be signed by anybody that's an applicant except for a social worker. So the only time this would not be signed is if a social worker is filing on behalf of a minor or incompetent adult. And that social worker will then go on to sign section 13A, sign, date, print. This printed name is important because we send these documentations off, this documentation off to different agencies. The Franchise Tax Board is one I know that if they see this section down here and the name is not printed, so if anything is left blank, they kick it back and say, we need this, this document is not complete. Please complete it and resubmit. Obviously, that's going to cause a delay in getting that verification. So keep that in mind. Section 12 always has to be signed, doesn't matter who the applicant is. Section 13 always has to be signed unless it's a social worker. And if it's a social worker, they're signing 12 because that always has to be signed, and the social worker is 13A. Here you have information on where to submit the application. If they're not going to be completing it directly on our website, you can mail it in. And here is the phone number to call for information. Our website is also available on the application. If they want to fax it in, they can call the 800 number and they'll give them a fax number depending on whether it's going to go here to Sacramento headquarters or it might be going to one of our processing offices. We have 16 counties throughout the state that process applications, as well as Sacramento, which again is the headquarters. So that could be a different fax number. They'll want to call our customer service to find out where they want to fax it to. Typical privacy notice on collection, standard boilerplate stuff. So that's the application. Hopefully that was helpful to you. We've got plenty of time, but I would like to give you back some of your day. So any questions, I'm here for you as long as you need, or you can reach out after calling our customer service toll-free number that you have on this application here. And I think Melissa put it into, if not, I think you put the website, but also hopefully the toll-free number. Let us know, if you have any questions right now, we're here. We've got a few minutes, lots of minutes. Like I said, as long as you need up until 3 o'clock to answer questions. So shoot away. And again, thank you for your time. If you're going to be signing off because you don't have questions or need to be somewhere, thank you for your time and hope this was helpful to you. So any questions? And
Yes.
if you want to turn on your mics or use the chat box, go ahead.
We do have a few questions. So asked for clarification for human traffic victims. They do this form as well as the wage compensation separate form.
Well, when you say they do this form as well as the wage compensation form, I don't know what this form, like the application. So I'm going to assume they mean the application. The application always has to be filled out. And then for the wage compensation, they'll fill out the human trafficking wage compensation form. They don't have to fill out the section 10, I think it was, which is the, they do not have to complete section 10 employer information. They're just going to be filling out that human trafficking wage compensation form.
And then, sorry, this is moving. Since fax is not reliable, is CalVCB considering email submissions?
Yes. So call the customer service toll-free line. I think that I would double check with them what the method is, but the info@victims.ca.gov We'll accept applications, and then our processing offices, some of them have specific emails that you can use to submit applications, but they're all going to vary. So if you are working directly with one of our processing offices, reach out to them. If you're not sure, call our customer service and they can assist you with that.
And someone also asked the same thing pretty much. Can we email applications for processing? So you answered that, and then let me see, and then that's pretty much it. And then I can add the toll-free number right now too.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Melissa. Any other questions? And if you want to open up your mic and talk, you can do so now, or use the chat box.
Yes, I have a question. How many days it takes for the applicant to know if they qualify?
Okay, if you can, let me turn up my mic here. Okay, go ahead and ask that again if you don't mind.
Yes, my question is how many days it takes for the applicant to know if they qualify?
So the application process, again, it's going to depend on how much information we have up front. The more streamlined that process will be. Right now, the last number I heard is they're running about 39 days average. So some are a little quicker, some might take a little longer. If we have an application and we have the crime report or whatever documentation they're using to substantiate the crime up front, and we can determine eligibility pretty quickly. So it's just going to depend on how complete is the application and do we have the information and documentation to determine eligibility.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you for this presentation. It was very informative. You might have said it earlier, so forgive me if I missed it. For victims, for witnesses of the crime, are they able to fill out this application? I know you said for minors it was okay, but if they're adults and they witnessed the crime, are they able to fill out this application and see if they're able to get compensated as well?
Currently, only minor witnesses are eligible.
Okay.
But if we have an adult who witnessed a crime, my first question would be, I would file an application or at least have a conversation, like how close in proximity were they? Was there a threat of injury to them? That's what I would want to know. So somebody witnesses a crime, let's say they're in a restaurant establishment and there's a fight right next to them and they're witnessing and somebody gets stabbed and they witness this crime. As a witness, they're not eligible, but were they in close proximity that there was a possible threat of injury to them? That would be my question. And if the answer is yes, they can file as a direct victim.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that example as well.
Sure. And that can be a scenario in, when we see these mass violence incidents, like if you remember the Route 91 festival that took place in Vegas several years ago, every single person at that concert in Las Vegas is a direct victim because there was a threat of physical injury to every single one of them.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Hi, my name is Sandra. I actually have a couple questions, but the first one is, you used the phrase minor or something adult. I don't remember what exact phrase you used, but I guess I'm curious if you mean like if they don't speak a language that is offered, like would that be an adult that is like, God, what was the word you used? Not unwilling, but like unable adult? Like, would that be a situation where we would be able to list ourselves as like the person helping them fill out the application?
Like incompetent?
Yes, that's the word, incompetent. Because
Mhm.
I mean, incompetent's kind of a strong word, so I don't want to like assume that you mean like because they can't speak the language that they're incompetent. But
Right.
yeah,
I think incompetent more referring to the fact that they they can't care for themselves, and so they need they rely on another adult for that care or even financial support. But yeah, whether it's somebody who's incompetent or somebody who doesn't speak the language or somebody who just doesn't understand the program, or maybe it's none of the above, but they just want to have somebody represent them because they want to have that support. There's no requirements to be a representative.
Okay. And then I guess I have a follow-up question about that. So I work for a nonprofit that does receive some VCB funding, and we are trying and apply having our clients who are victims of crime apply through the VCB program for compensation. And we don't. You mentioned like if we don't work directly with one of the processing offices. So how do I work directly with one of the processing offices? Because I've reached out before and they really just send me back to Sacramento, and they're just like send it to this like main like just main phone number, or like fill it out online or fill it out in person and like mail it in. But I'm not getting anybody like actually telling me, okay, here's your point of contact. Here's the person you submit it to, and you can reach out to them with any questions.
I would say most of our offices don't offer that direct information. We really would like everything directed through our customer service line. It's staffed with 12 or 15 staff members who are very knowledgeable about the program. And that's the avenue that we would like to direct that communication. And they can assist you with, depending on what county you're in, if there is an office close to you that you can process applications. But, and I don't want to speak for those processing offices. I'm thinking out loud here. I'm not sure if, because they work so closely with the DA's offices, if these are those crimes that are going through the court system. So I think every county might work a little differently. I would ask, what county you're in, and then check with customer service or reach out to me and we can find out that information for you. I don't know how, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know how those processing offices determine what applications go that route versus headquarters. Because if you're hearing that some are getting steered away and processing through headquarters, let me find out a little bit more about that. And then I can better answer that question.
We had a question. If they were wondering if there will be a recording available after.
Not of this presentation, but we are looking at putting together presentations and recording them so that we can have the links on our website. So stay tuned for that. But this one in particular was not recorded. And did you have another question? Our last speaker, I think you had another question maybe.
Oh, me? No, I think that was it. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. No worries. Anybody else? Any other questions? If you want, the last person, if you want to put your name in the chat or reach out after, and we can talk more about the processing offices and how that works. Because I don't want to speak for them, and I'd like to find out a little bit more. Okay, thanks, Sandra. Any other questions or anything?
Not in the chat.
Melissa, thanks for your help. I appreciate it. Melissa is also in our outreach department and very assistive with all of the presentations, as you can see. So thank you. If there are no more questions, then again, thank you everybody so much for your time. Thank you for your interest in our program. I know that you'll find it a great resource. Again, if you haven't taken the overview, please, when you can, we offer presentations all throughout the year, and the ones that we do webinars are posted on our website. But if you'd like to request a presentation, please fill out the request a presentation form, which you can also find on our website, and send that in, and we will, most likely myself, will reach out to you to get that coordinated. Also, if you have any events in your area, we do like to table events, we like to speak at events, or just partner with some of you. Let us know, even if it's not your own event, but something else you think that CalVCB could benefit from, or somebody could benefit from our presence there. Definitely let us know. We really trying to, get the word out about the program, and hope that you can help us do so. So thank you again. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and thank you for participating.